Our regular criminal lawyer Solomon Friedman joins us, and former law clerk of the House of Commons, Rob Walsh. So, Mr. Walsh, 9 more senators going to an RCMP investigation. If you were the Senate law clerk today, what would you be advising?
The Senate or these 9 senators?
Well, the Senate first.
Well, the Senate has no role to play in that. It's going to the RCMP. The RCMP will do its investigation, and the Senate, obviously, my advice to the Senate would be to cooperate with the RCMP's investigation.
And if you're a criminal lawyer, there are 9 people that I guess you're saying to them you're available for work, but lawyer up fast.
Well, it sounds like this is going to be great news for criminal lawyers. You know, we thought that Mike Duffy maybe had the monopoly on that, but it looks like the wealth will be there to be spread, and hopefully generously.
Now, Robert, here's what I'm curious about, because 9 will go immediately to the RCMP for investigation. There are 21 other senators who have questionable expenses. I'm told that the RCMP are duty bound to want to review those 21, even if there may be nothing of a criminal nature, just as a precaution.
Well, that's probably true. They would feel they have a professional obligation to confirm that there is nothing there of a criminal nature that warranted investigation. I mean, the AG, in recommending they go to the RCMP, is not the one to decide that question. The RCMP itself will decide whether these other cases warrant investigation or not.
So, what's the effect of, well, 9 for sure criminal and another 21 questionable expenses? Does this help Duffy, who's been saying all along, hey, I'm not the only one?
Well, you know, that's a really interesting question, and it's one that will only be answered once we can look at that report and figure out what type of conduct gets you in the 21 group and what type of conduct gets you in that group of 9. Because if any of Duffy's activities fall into that 21 group, that's a fairly decent defense to say, if the Auditor General, who has recommended some people to the RCMP for charges, doesn't believe that this is criminal conduct, well, surely I can't be found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But if he falls into that 9 category in terms of all of his conduct, that could be problematic.
And Donald Bain, Mr. Duffy's lawyer, can use this report right away. I mean, he can just take it as his defense document.
Yes, we've seen the Ernst & Young report, for example, was admitted as an exhibit for the truth of its contents. And I can assure you that if Don Bain thinks this document is helpful to him in any way, it'll be, in front of the judge as soon as possible.
So what do you think of that?
Well, I'm not a big fan of this Donald Bain argument about everyone else was doing it, so it must be all right. But I would agree with Mr. Friedman that to the extent that the AG is saying that these other 21 are, as it were, administrative errors as opposed to criminal conduct, that would likely, and if Mr. Duffy fitted into that, then to that extent it may be helpful to Mr. Duffy. But generally speaking, I don't think the argument that one can point to a set of rules as being vague and thereby get off any responsibility for what one does, I don't personally buy that argument.
The Senate leaders, the Tory Senate leader Claude Carignan, and the Speaker Housakis, and the Liberal leader James Cowan, they were the ones who decided on having a special arbiter step in. Nobody disputes former Supreme Court Justice Ian Binney is a great choice, but they were also subject to the audit and are found to owe money. Should they have recused themselves from that?
Of course they should have, in my judgment. I just find this very hard to believe. I don't know, as I've said once before in connection with the story, I don't know whether to laugh or cry. This is rankly incompetent that these 3 gentlemen would move into a leadership role when, and we're told this is the case, they've been told that the AG has some reservations about their expense claims, that they should move into a leadership role and set up this regime for dealing with disputes. I mean, no, it is absolutely unbelievable that they should allow this to happen. The Senate, I'm almost led to the point now, Bob, where I think the Senate may need to be put into a trusteeship. I think the leadership doesn't know how to manage its institution, and we should appoint a trustee to look after the Senate for all its legal problems. It's just that bad.
But they wouldn't be required to resign their positions, only that they should not have involved themselves in this.
Well, they should not be part of the committee they sit on now, which made decisions about this process. Stand back and participate in the process as a senator, but not beyond that.
What's your view on that?
You know, it's a very interesting conflict of interest issue, but the real trouble here is, you know, who watches the watchmen? We have the concept in Canadian law of parliamentary supremacy, and that's why we hear these discussions about parliamentary privilege. The Parliament is supreme. So who then is going to govern Parliament? And ordinarily you have committees or subcommittees made up of parliamentarians themselves. But when it's those very same parliamentarians who are being investigated for wrongdoing, that presents, you know, a very clear, if at the very least an apprehension of bias, if not actual bias itself. It's certainly a very troubling issue, and one, it appears, with no real clear answer.
And finally, what do we do about the Senate? I mean, should there be an effort to abolish it? Should there be an effort to seriously reform it? Because I don't know how we can continue on with any kind of respectability given the criminal probes hanging over it.
Well, I think this current scandal is the occasion for asking that very question, and it's a very important question, but we shouldn't respond to that question having in mind this disastrous situation in the current Senate. And I think we should look at some suggestions for how the institution could be improved and how appointments could be made in a less partisan manner. And those kinds of issues should be addressed if one believes there is a valuable constitutional function served by the Senate. If one is not of that view, then obviously one would say shut it down. But if you think there's a constitutional purpose served by the Senate, then let's go back to the drawing boards and think about how we should appoint to the Senate and whether we should reframe those duties in some manner. But it's a legitimate question. I think it's a question that now has greater prominence and hopefully will not just fade away once this particular scandal itself fades away.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.